you. My name is Jenny Yang. I'm the Associate Director of Admission and Financial Aid at St. Catherine University. In no way tonight am I here to talk about St. Kate's. Many people in our profession in financial aid like to come out and talk to parents and students about the financial aid process. We want to be able to share our resources to families and students as much as possible, so we think it's important that we come out to do these presentations. For tonight's agenda, we will talk briefly about the importance of financial aid, talk about the FAFSA, and then talk about the aid sources that are available for families and students. And then we'll talk briefly about special circumstances, often known as financial aid appeals as well. So the goal of financial aid is really three-pronged approach. It's a collaboration of three entities. So the university, they will do their part by providing merit scholarships. And then the government. So government will provide grants as students and families qualify for them, along with student loans. And then in addition to that, the student and family. So your portion is to complete the FAFSA, complete the financial aid process, and then there might be a portion of what we call the expected family contribution, what you will be expected to cover for your son or daughter's college education. The goal of financial aid is to assist families and students to help them determine what their financial need will be. And so that is achieved by evaluating your financial situation and determining your financial need, with also providing a balance of gift aid, which is money that students don't have to repay, and then self-help aid, which is money the student may have to repay or work towards that amount. The FAFSA, or financial aid, the principles of need analysis, what they look at is really the family's financial situation. So we're looking at what is the student's financial responsibility to cover his or her educational expenses, and then what is the parent's financial responsibility as well. And all of those things come into play in completing the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. So before we talk about the FAFSA or dive into the details of the FAFSA, I want to highlight a couple terms here as I'm going through the presentation. You will often hear in the media or at the schools the cost of attendance term. So cost of attendance is the direct cost, which means that it's tuition and fees, room and board, plus transportation, books, and miscellaneous. So if you want to think about it as an overarching budget for that student at the university that the student will be attending. The cost of attendance term is also known as the sticker price, is what you often will hear in the media that they will refer to as well. The direct costs are things that students will be charged directly. So if your son or daughter is going to the U of M and living on campus, then he or she will be charged the tuition and fees and the room and board, and that's what we call the direct costs. As you're going through this process with your son or daughter, you'll want to look more at the direct cost. What is going to be your bottom line amount before grants and scholarships and student loans? The cost of attendance, like I said, includes things that are not charged to a student, but are built within the student's budget. So things as books, transportation, maybe if they are not living on campus, personal living expenses or allowances. So in order to determine what your family's financial need is, you will be filling out the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. I want to make a note that the term free, the FAFSA is free for families to fill out, and you should be using the FAFSA.gov website. There is a FAFSA.com website, and that's not the site where you should be completing your FAFSA. The FAFSA.com website will actually ask you to pay about $79 towards the end of the application. So if you're on the FAFSA.com and you're completing it and it's going to ask you to pay, then you are on the wrong site. You'll want to go to the FAFSA.gov, the government website. So as you're starting the FAFSA, so for students who will be starting fall 2015, so seniors this year, you can complete the FAFSA as early as January 1st, 2015 for students that will be going to college this fall. That means that you will need your parents or the parents' taxes, W-2s, the students' tax forms if they will file, and then if they will not file, they have W-2s or work, you'll want that information as well. If you are completing the FAFSA and you have not completed your taxes, the FAFSA does have 3 options for families to choose. So there's one, you will go in and you'll select, if you already completed, then you will select that as already completed your tax for the 2014 year. If you are doing it January 2nd and knowing that you will file, then you will select will file your taxes, and then you can go back into the FAFSA and put your information after you complete and file your taxes. If you will not file your taxes, then you will select will not file on the FAFSA. And then you will put, if you earn any income, just an estimated amount there. The FAFSA does require that parents and students sign the FAFSA electronically with a FAFSA PIN. How many of you have sons or daughters that are in college or have graduated that you completed FAFSA for? Okay, so a couple people. If you already do have a son or daughter that graduated or are in college, then you will have a FAFSA PIN already. And you will use the same FAFSA PIN for your son or daughter, but your son or daughter will also need to have their own FAFSA PIN as well. You can actually go in and register to get your FAFSA PIN at any time. So if you wanted to go tonight and register to get FAFSA PIN, you can go ahead and do that. You don't have to wait until January 1st, 2015. You will then put your date of birth, social security number, and then I believe now you can actually pick the 4-digit PIN of what you're choosing. However, with that being said, starting spring 2015, we have been notified by the U.S. Department of Education that they are actually no longer require the FAFSA PIN. So that means that maybe in March, the FAFSA PIN will actually go away, but we are still encouraging families to still complete and get a FAFSA PIN. What that means is they will actually require families to complete get a user ID for the Federal Student Aid website, both for the student and parent. And that is simply due to the fact that there are lots of identity theft, computer hacking, that they want to protect your identity. So they are, because with the FAFSA PIN now, you do have to enter your date of birth, social security on the computer screen. So with the Federal Student ID password, it will eliminate that portion for families and students. So more to come. We don't know the details yet, but there will be more information starting spring 2015, hopefully by March. So what the FAFSA will ask is there are 2 components. So student information, parent information. So it will ask for the student demographic information. You will enter in their social security number, date of birth. You'll want to put in their legal name as it appears on their state ID or their social security card. That then will match the person to their name, and that will be sent to the school. So you will go ahead and do that. For male students, it will ask them if they have registered for selected service. If they have not registered with selected service, it does give them the option to do so right from the FAFSA. So students must file a FAFSA every year. So after your son or daughter is a senior this year, then they will need to complete a new FAFSA again for their sophomore year. You'll want to make sure that you are completing for the right academic year. So that means that for students entering college in fall 2015, you will be completing the 2015-16 FAFSA. But the tricky thing to remember is you're inputting your 2014 income. And then as you go through the student section, it will ask several questions to determine if parent information should be on the FAFSA. So there are questions of what we call dependency questions. So is the student 24? Is the student a veteran? Is the student homeless? Questions that will automatically determine if a student should have parent information or become independent. In general, most students from entering college right from high school are dependent students. So that means that even if they are 18, parent information is still required on the FAFSA, unless they meet some of those special circumstances, which I'll talk about at the end of the presentation. And then students will be prompted to answer information about income as well. So that means that if a student did not have any income and did not file, he or she then can select the option that will not file. If the student will plan to file, then he or she will want to select that they will file. If they've already completed their taxes, then they will select already completed. And they would then put their income on the FAFSA. And then it will if the FAFSA determines that the parent should be on the FAFSA, then we'll ask for parent demographics as well. It will ask for the parent who the child lives with or has custody. So in blended families, so if your daughter lives with you more than 50% of the time, then it's your information on the FAFSA. And we'll talk about the blended families later on as well. For students whose parents are divorced, as I said earlier, it would be the parent who the child lived with in the past 12 months, or the parent who provides more than 50% of financial support to that son or daughter. If the custodial parent is remarried, then it has to be both the biological, for example, biological mom and stepdad's information if it's deemed that the child lives with mom. Even if stepdad doesn't provide financial support or will not provide any financial support for the student to go to college, stepdad's information still needs to be on the FAFSA. For unmarried parents but who live together, it would be both of your information. There are situations where parents are divorced and they live together in the same household. Their information, both of their information has to go on the FAFSA. Or there are parents, families who have never been married or not legally married or recognized by the state for as domestic partners or in gay marriages, then both of the parents have to go on the FAFSA as well. In terms of household size, it will ask how many people will live in the household that the parent will provide more than 50% of financial support. And we often get this question in regards to, so let's say that, mom or dad both provide support to grandma, but grandma lives in nursing home. If you can determine that you will provide more than 50% or you have provided more than 50% of financial support to grandma in terms of paying for her nursing costs, she can actually be part of the household size, even though she may not live in the house physically. And the parents are not considered as a number in college. So even if mom was pursuing her own bachelor's or a master's degree, she cannot be included in the number in college. So then you'll go into the parent income information, and this is where parents will input their tax information. You will be looking at your adjusted gross income and the taxes paid, along with any other information about on-tax income such as 401k, things that you will find that will be listed on your W-2s, and usually they are listed in the box 12 with the codes A through D. And then in terms of parent income, so the way the FAFSA formula is written out is it's really based on the parent's wages and adjusted gross income. The FAFSA formula itself allows what we call an education allowance protection. So that means that they will only put into consideration about 6% of your assets or investments that you have. And all the rest is not included. But majority of the FAFSA formula is from the parent's adjusted gross income. And the things that I referred to earlier, such as on-tax income, that does need to go on the FAFSA as well. So child support received, and also child support paid. Anything such as education credits, those will carry it over from the FAFSA from the IRS as well. Taxable combat pay or special combat pay will be will need to be put on the FAFSA. In addition to if parents have, let's say they were in graduate school getting their master's, if they have scholarships that were taxable, that will go on the FAFSA as well. And then the FAFSA now does allow for parents and students to import their tax information. So, for example, if you go into the FAFSA, let's say on February 21st, and you file your taxes on, let's say, February 1st, you may be eligible to use the data retrieval tool. That means that your 2014 income will be directly imported into the FAFSA if you allow the system to do so. Those that are not allowed to use the data retrieval, regardless of when you file your taxes, so married couples who file separately, married couples who file, one person file as head of household, students, legal parents are unmarried but living together, and then anyone who filed any type of amended return, or you think you might have to file an amended return, any foreign taxes, and the residents who live in Puerto Rico. So what the DRT does is it will import the information for tax filers who file electronically. If you filed within 2 to 3 weeks, you should be able to use the DRT as you filled the FAFSA. So let's say maybe you filled the FAFSA January 1st and you put your income that you will file, and then you go file your taxes in the next 4 weeks. Let's say February 2nd, then you should be able to use the DRT and go back and import and update your FAFSA information to your 2014 income within 3 weeks. If you file paper, it does take a little bit longer. So it's about 8 to 11 weeks. So that process does take a little bit longer. But you can go back into the FAFSA. If you don't use the DRT, then you can put in the manually enter the income information to the FAFSA as well. By using the DRT, it decreases your chances of being selected for verification. So about 1 in 4 students are selected for verification. These are all the items that are automatically populated from the IRS. So your adjusted gross income, taxes paid, education credits, IRA deductions. You do have to split out the wages. So the FAFSA, the income, unfortunately, the wages won't split between the parents. So you will need to split out the wages. If mom makes, $30,000 and dad makes $80,000, then you will need to split out the wages on the FAFSA. The most important thing is actually submitting or clicking the submit button. There are tons of times when students will call our office and say, I used the DRT, did you get my update information? And we can look it up and we can say, well, actually you started to look at it, but you actually didn't click the submit button. So the DRT did not go through. So you want to make sure that after you import information that you actually click submit for the information to be carried over into the FAFSA. And then students can put up to 10 different schools with different options of living on campus, off campus, or with parents. So students can put up to 10 schools and 10 different living options. So let's say if they wanted to go to St. Thomas, but they're going to live at home, they can choose that. But then they might choose to send it to the U of M, and then they want to live on campus, students can choose that. Financial aid offices do use that information to determine a student's financial aid packet, depending on what their housing option is. So you'll just want to encourage your son or daughter to really think about, do they want to live on campus or at home or off campus, in whichever school that they are planning to go to. Now, at the very end, then student and parent, this is where you actually would enter in your FAFSA PIN to electronically sign the FAFSA. And then once you sign the FAFSA with your PIN, you'll enter in your PIN number and then your son or daughter's PIN number, and then submit the FAFSA to the school. So after you submit the FAFSA, you will get a confirmation that says that it has been successfully submitted. At the very top, there is a 4-digit number called a data release number, also known as a DRN. That is tied to the student's FAFSA information. And that also allows schools to look up the information even before we get the FAFSA. So for example, if a student called our office and said, I thought I submitted my information to St. Kate's and we don't see it in our system, then we can look it up through the federal system. As long as we have the DRN number, we can look up to see if the FAFSA was completed. And maybe it was just simply that the student didn't add us as part of their school code. Then at that point, we will tell the student to go back into the FAFSA, add St. Kate's, and then resubmit it to St. Kate's. Also, the bottom two, the lower on my right hand, the circle there, it lists out the expected family contribution. That's the EFC. The EFC is an index number that allows colleges, universities to determine what your family's financial need is. It's not necessarily a dollar that you are expected to pay, but that then allows schools to determine what your financial need is. The EFC will be the same from school to school, no matter where the student is going, whether it's a 2-year community college or the U of M or a private school. So within a couple weeks, the student will be notified through an email, whichever email that's on the FAFSA, you will get an email with what we call the student aid report, the SAR, and that then will say you've completed the FAFSA, here's the summary of your information. Now the student can go back in anytime and view the student aid report online anytime through the FAFSA website. I talked a little bit earlier about the verification process. About 1 in 4 FAFSAs are selected for verification. And what that means is that schools, colleges, universities are expected to follow up with the student to gather additional documentation from the family and student. So we would ask for tax return transcripts. They're not necessarily your tax forms. The tax transcripts are the documents that are processed by the IRS after they've had a chance to process your taxes. So, you can already receive your refund even before the IRS process your tax information. Once they process your tax information, then all individuals should have a tax return transcript out there. And that's a document that we want to collect from you. Or if you did not, if you don't have the tax transcript, you can go back in and use the DRT, and that will eliminate us requesting the tax return transcript. There are also additional forms that schools will ask families and students to complete as well. So if you were selected for verification, you will be notified by the school. If you were not selected for verification and you don't get a notification, you can certainly call the financial office and ask them if you were selected. But more than likely, if you were selected, they will follow up with you right away. And then automatically for students to qualify to be independent, so they would be in graduate school or be, by the time they fill the FAFSA, turn the age of 24. If they were married legally, they have legal dependents other than a spouse, or they have kids that they support. If the student anytime was 13 and was orphan or was ward of the court, if they're inactive or veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, they're emancipated minor that are in legal guardianship, unaccompanied minors, or students who are at risk of homeless. If any of the students can say yes to any of this, they are automatically considered independent for FAFSA purposes, and parent information would not be asked on the FAFSA. So then what happens after you put all information into the FAFSA, right? So I talked a bit earlier about the expected family contribution. So what we look at is that the cost of attendance minus your EFC, your expected family contribution, is what we determine what your financial need is going to be. The financial need is going to be different from school to school depending on what we call the cost of attendance. So if you remember earlier, I talked about the cost of attendance being as tuition fees, room and board, plus other things that are not charged to the student. So for example, the expected family contribution are things that makes up the EFCs: parent income, student income, household size, number in college, on-tax income such as assets or investment income. So to give you an example of what this means, so let's say the EFC is a 5,000 EFC. At a 2-year institute or 4-year public institution, their cost of attendance might be $24,000. The student's financial need at the 4-year public institution is $19,000. For a public 2-year, because their cost is a little bit less, their cost of attendance is about $12,000. So their need there is $7,000. At a 4-year private institution, the cost may be as high as $40,000, and the need is $35,000. So for students that may qualify for unsubsidized loan or subsidized loan, so if they get subsidized loan at a 4-year institution, but they might not be eligible for it at a 2-year public institution because the subsidized loan is based on financial need. So we'll move into what are the different resources out there for families and students. We'll talk about scholarships, grants, loans, and student employment. So now that you filled out the FAFSA, so what happens, right? So when schools get their FAFSA, schools usually get the FAFSA within 3 to 5 days after you complete them. If the school is listed on the FAFSA, then schools would generate a financial aid award to the student and send that out to the student and family. On the financial aid award, it will list the different types of grants, scholarships, student employment, also any type of loans that the student may be eligible for. In terms of federal Pell Grants, there are 3 different grants through the federal government. The first one is the federal Pell Grant, and that really is for families whose income is less than $65,000 for a family of 4. Now, if a student qualifies for a Pell Grant, whether the student is going to 2-year public or 4-year private, the Pell Grant amount is the same from school to school. Okay. The SEOG grant will vary. Institutions have the discretion to determine how much they can award for the SEOG grant based on how much has been allotted to them from the federal government. So usually the SEOG grant will go to Pell Grant recipients. The TEACH grant is not based on income. It's really based on a couple of criteria in terms of students' interest in teaching afterwards, after they graduate from college, and that amount is about $4,000. It has been decreasing due to sequestration in the last couple of years, and I believe now it's about $3,900 and some change. So it is decreasing, but the grant does require that a student teach in a low-income area with a high-need field, typically, the sciences in a low-income area. So they do have to have that commitment. If they're not able to fulfill that commitment, the grant then becomes an unsubsidized loan with the interest rate retroactive to the date that it was disbursed. So when students come to me and say, I looked online and I saw this thing about TEACH grant, I would really counsel them through. Oftentimes if they were a senior in college, that's a little bit different. They've probably determined their major, but if they're a new student and wanted to TEACH grant, I counsel them through it, make sure they understand the criteria, because I would hate for someone to be stuck with the loan that they maybe didn't intend to in the first place. And then in terms of state grant opportunities, I saw of you received the Paying for College. That actually is put on by the Minnesota Office of Higher Education, a great office with great resources and staff. Any questions you have about any state programs, they are there to help answer your questions as well. The state does have Minnesota State Grant, and the state grant actually allows for families in the higher income to potentially receive Minnesota State Grant. So we're looking at higher income ranges higher than the Pell Grant. And then what it does require is that the FAFSA has to be completed no later than the 30th day into the term. And then the state also provides other grants for students who can provide documentation to receive the Minnesota Indian Scholarship, the Minnesota Child Care Grant for students who are parents, and then Minnesota GI Bill for students who may, or parents who may have exhausted federal, they can certainly apply for the Minnesota GI Bill. And then Minnesota DREAM Act, which allows undocumented students to be eligible for Minnesota State Grant and also to receive in-state tuition. That's new about 2 years, so this is the second year students are receiving that. Students do have to have attended Minnesota high school for at least 3 years or graduate from Minnesota high school or earn a GED while they're here. And then they have to comply with selective service as well. So those are opportunities for students who are undocumented living in Minnesota here. Those students who are undocumented students cannot complete the FAFSA. The federal government does not currently allow undocumented students to receive federal aid, so they are not able to complete the FAFSA. But they could complete for the Minnesota Dream Act for state grant through the Minnesota Office of Higher Education. They have a separate application for these students and families. And then searching for scholarships. So what I like to tell parents and students during this portion is that you should start early and treat the scholarship search as a job. So for every hour, you should be submitting several essays to the different scholarship entities. And yes, there are a ton of outside scholarships from the big foundations, but what we see here for our students graduating from the state are scholarships from their local Chamber of Commerce, their local Rotary Club, the Knights of Columbus, and it could be anywhere really from $250 to $1,000. And that 1 hour that your son or daughter will spend writing that essay, hey, they made $250 out of that 1 hour, right? So, I would always encourage students to treat it as a job and maybe just spend that amount of time looking for scholarships. In addition to that, there is the search engine called fastweb.com. What I encourage families and students to do is certainly you can search for scholarships on that website, but create a separate email just for scholarship searches, because what will happen is fastweb.com will send you a ton of junk mail that you probably don't want to go to your own personal email for many months and years to come. So create a separate email as for your scholarship searches. And then also, have your son or daughter also do a spreadsheet of the different scholarships, the deadline dates, what is required. Sometimes the scholarship places will require an essay. They may not require an essay. So, that will also keep them on track as well and help you guide them to make sure that they're following up on their scholarships. The guidance office or the counseling office is a great resource, or the career office at the high schools are great resources too. If your employer provides matching, it certainly is worth asking your employer, if they offer any type of matching for your student. And then the different types of loans that are available for students, and really just the first two are for students, and then the third one is for parents. So the federal Perkins loan probably is one of the better loans out there. It's for students who have financial need, and each institution can determine who they determine is financial need or has financial need. This loan often is a first come, first serve, so it is important that you do fill out the FAFSA by that priority deadline date of whichever college university that your son and daughter is looking at. The federal direct staffer loan is guaranteed for students. Both loans are guaranteed for students without cosigner, so just want to mention that too. Within the federal direct staffer loan program, there are two types of loans. The subsidized loan, that means there's no interest when the student is in school. The unsubsidized loan does accrue interest when the student is in school. The federal Perkins loan, the repayment, students have a grace period of 9 months before they have to pay back on their loans. And the direct staffer loans, the grace period of 6 months before they have to start paying back on the loans. The Perkins loan has always been a 5% interest rate. Even when I went to college, it was 5%, and it still is 5% today. The direct staffer loan, the interest rate is tied to the Treasury bill, so that means the interest rate will change every fiscal year as the government decides on what is the rate. Last year, 13-14 is 3.86. This year for the 14-15 is 4.21. So the interest does go up depending on the Treasury bill. The Federal Direct Parent Plus loan is a loan for parents to borrow to help their son or daughter defray the cost. The Parent Plus loan can never be consolidated with the other federal student loan. So parents can certainly borrow this. The loan looks at the parent's credit, not necessarily your debt to income ratio, but your credit score. The interest rate is also, this interest rate is tied to the Treasury bill as well too, and there is an origination fee for the federal direct parent plus loan. And then alternative private loans are loans that you can get through your local banks or credit union, or there are other type of alternative loan programs like Discover Loan, Sallie Mae. Those are private loans. We don't encourage students to borrow private loans if they don't need it. We rather have them try to exhaust their federal loans or try to figure out a payment plan with the university before they borrow a private loan. In terms of student employment, also known as work study, we encourage students to work on campus. Students may qualify for Minnesota work study or federal work study program. What that means is it's not necessarily money that is deducted at the beginning of each semester off of their tuition. It's money that students will have to earn throughout the semester. The way the work study is managed at the institution is going to be different. So at St. Kate's, for students who are eligible for Minnesota or federal work study, we actually have a job placement program that we place first year students to match them with their set of skills and also hours that they are available to work. Now, at some other schools and other institutions that I worked at before did not have that as an option for students who have work study. So students would apply through the work study program through the HR office, submit their resumes, submit cover letters. So as you visit colleges or meet with financial aid offices, you'll want to ask them about the work study program and how they manage the work study program for their students. And then special circumstances, I want to talk a little bit about this too, because I want to make sure that all of you know that you can go to the financial aid office at any time and talk with a financial aid counselor or financial aid specialist at the institution your son or daughter is applying to, should your family experience any financial difficulties. So that means a change in income due to under hours or underemployment or loss of job, death of parent, spouse, or death of spouse or parent, and then change in household size due to divorce or separation. Any unusual out-of-pocket medical expenses that have been paid in the past calendar year or the current calendar year. One-time income that you received, whether that's through an inheritance or sales of business, which often shows up as part of your adjusted gross income for that tax year. Any elementary or secondary tuition that you pay. And then for students too, if you feel like you should actually be independent, you'll want to talk with with the financial aid office to determine if they can make a judgment to grant you a dependency override. Dependency overrides are rare, and when I say it's rare, because we required documentation from unbiased sources, so letters to support the student's situation. We do have the judgment to determine if the student can become independent. And when I say it's rare, because sometimes parents will say, well, I just don't want to provide any of my information on the FAFSA for my son or daughter. That's not a dependency override. When we look at a student's situation, we deem it case by case, but we look at to see, is there clear parental abuse, whether that's physically, emotionally, or the child, the student can provide documentation from a social worker or counselor to say, parent is not involved in the student's life at all. Student really has no contact whatsoever with their parent. I worked with a student previously where she, was pretty certain that she should be an independent student because she moved out, was living on her own. She was under the age of 24, so that meant that she was still considered dependent by FAFSA purposes. Wrote letters, and what she provided to us was not sufficient. And dad was willing to provide the information. Student just didn't want to talk to dad. And that was her story, was she just didn't get along with dad. Well, that's not enough for us to make a determination to provide or to do a dependency override. And what I tell families as a student is that if an institution, if we were ever audited by the federal government, they will require those documentation. And we want to do our due diligence to make sure that financial aid is going towards students who are deserving in terms of their providing correct information to us and so forth. And then tuition reciprocity does allow for students to attend a public institution they will be eligible for to receive in-state tuition. So students going to public institutions in Wisconsin, South Dakota, North Dakota, and even the Canadian province of Manitoba. There are other types of exchange programs in the Midwest that you can certainly utilize too. And the Minnesota Office of Higher Education actually has the whole list of all the schools that participate in the exchange programs and provides information and steps in terms of how to apply to get the in-state tuition for your son or daughter. And then certainly, you know, there are tax advantages for financial aid purposes as well. You know, financial aid specialists are not necessarily tax preparers, but we do want to mention too that there are tax advantages, and you'll want to check with your tax preparer or tax accountant. And then lastly, so you all have the PowerPoint. These are some resources that you can certainly refer to, find out more information. The College Board is a great resource that talks about, you know, access to college, you know, essay components, all of those things in terms of applying to college. The FastWeb.com website for scholarship searches. The FinAid.org is a comprehensive site that provides information about loans, veterans benefits, and also loan calculators as well. And then the Minnesota Office of Higher Education.